Illinois on the Record. Is the state ready for Election Day? How the budget impasse could impact voting. Plus, the president of Bradley University joins the show, and what he says about financial aid and the cost of higher education. And the politics of pot, what a medical marijuana company CEO is saying about the pilot program in Illinois.
Now, from your local election headquarters, this is Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome to Central Illinois on the Record. I'm Paul Cicchini. The state budget fiasco continues to play out in Peoria. This time, the Center for Prevention of Abuse is fighting to keep its doors open. As CIOTR's Hannah Hilliard explains, the longer the budget impasse continues, the harder it gets for the center to provide services.
The 2016 fiscal year is almost over, and state lawmakers are in the same position as the day it started.
Logic told us that it wouldn't take more than 3 months, then it wouldn't take more than 6 months, and now we're at 9 months and counting.
And it's slowly draining the Center for Prevention of Abuse's resources. The state is currently withholding $500,000 from the center for particular programs like Adult Protective Services.
To date, we have been able to continue on with full services because we are very fiscally responsible.
But if the budget impasse continues, the center's executive director Carol Myrna says they may have to make some adjustments, especially as another source of revenue just dried out.
Their reserves have tapped out, and now that means that our payments from the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault have stopped.
That has forced smaller rape crisis centers across the state to close or make major cuts. But Peoria Center is holding on. That's why this budget impasse makes the center's fundraisers like the annual duck race in August that much more vital.
That allows us to continue to care for their friends, their neighbors, their co-workers. And ultimately, if we weren't here to care for them, it would affect them directly.
A bill in Springfield would restore funding for rape crisis centers to pass the Senate and will make its way to the House once it's back in session April 4th. The backlog of DNA rape kits is getting larger because of the budget impasse. The Illinois State Police says its lab has been behind on thousands of pending tests. The backlog of untested cases topped more than 2,000 by the end of February. The state's budget crisis is holding hostage over $1 million in state funding needed to hire about 10 more scientists. Students in Leroy got to show off their Panther pride to Governor Rauner last week.
I'm extremely passionate about Leroy High School.
The governor toured and answered questions from students. He also discussed public school funding and a bill making its way through the Senate. SB 1 would adjust the school funding formula to help districts that need it most. But Governor Rauner wants to make sure money isn't being taken away from other districts.
I think the governor's proposal talks about some certainty, but I think the evidence-based model begins to look at every public school in a unique way and based upon their own unique needs. And I think that's a path that's more defensible.
The superintendent says no matter where people stand, it's encouraging school funding continues to be a part of the conversation. Illinois College in Jacksonville is offering a new program for incoming freshmen. Finish in 4 years or the school will cover the cost of the remaining courses required for graduation. The school hopes the move will boost admission and get a greater number of graduates into the workforce more quickly. The director of admissions says about 60% of students nationwide don't graduate in 4 years.
People do have to pay off student loans, and being able to get in the job market in a shorter amount of time, that's definitely beneficial.
The program will pair students with an academic advisor to make sure students are meeting program requirements. There is another exception. If you're enrolling in the engineering program, you can't apply to finish in 4 years because it's a 5-year program. College students are getting letters which say they're approved for a MAP grant even though the program has no money. Colleges are still waiting to see those dollars because there's no state budget. The Illinois Student Assistance Commission says it's hopeful lawmakers will appropriate funding for MAP grant recipients. The program distributes more than $350 million in grants to about 125,000 students each year.
Do our part, but again, it's a shame that we have to go through that step when the state of Illinois has promised those funds. We certainly want the governor and the General Assembly to come together to pass that budget.
Most students have until this spring to accept MAP grant funds from a college or university. Lawmakers are meeting some of the governor's suggestions when it comes to decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana. Instead of last year's measure that would allow possession of 15 grams or less of marijuana to be a civil offense, lawmakers proposed it be lowered to 10 grams, with boosting the fines. A standard would also be set for what's considered too high to drive. Despite the changes, some officers have their doubts.
In Illinois, we have zero tolerance laws for those who are under 21 and drink any amount of alcohol and drive. So I would expect that the same should apply for marijuana.
According to the Marijuana Policy Project, Illinois is one of 15 states that proposed legislation to decriminalize cannabis possession. Cities and towns could soon turn to private help to collect taxes. A proposed bill would allow sensitive financial information to be shared with vendors. The files are only available to select officials. Local governments favor these agreements because they provide resources unavailable to the city and are cost-effective. Springfield's already worked with third-party vendors to find uncollected taxes.
This is what they do for a living. They know what they're looking for. They have the software, they have the technical know-how, they have the people to go in and search for these things. Cities like Springfield simply don't have the personnel to do it.
The bill stipulates third parties must enter into a confidentiality agreement with the Department of Revenue and follow the same rules as the city. Expectations are high ahead of Election Day in Illinois after primary day experienced record-breaking turnout. This will be the first presidential race where same-day voter registration will be allowed at polling places across the state. As CIOTR's Matt Porter reports, many counties may struggle to find the money to meet that new mandate.
When turnout broke records for the primary in Sangamon County this month, it also showed the weaknesses leading into the general election.
We were heavily stressed, both from a personnel perspective and a communications perspective, dealing with the Election Day registration.
The state election board hasn't received the almost $4 million it's requested, and the county, like others, has had to cut back on judges because of the budget crisis.
We never see our revenues growing from the state's perspective.
But the demands of a new law allowing for same-day voter registration is changing the game. The county estimates it will need to invest $80,000 to $100,000 in machines and personnel to meet the new demand.
We're just going to have to dig deep and find the resources that we need.
In March, 4 times as many new voters showed up than expected, and with high-profile candidates like Donald Trump bringing in new voters, party officials say the county will need to prepare for more record-breaking turnout.
The approach that our county clerk had going into it was to try to kind of make an estimation, don't go overboard, waste money. But, I think now the error will be, if we have to go overboard, we have to go overboard and prepare for this.
Of course, the state could still pass a budget before November, providing some support. If it does not, there could be more long lines on November 8th. Still to come, the state of medical marijuana in Illinois. What's next for the pilot program? But first, sitting down with the president of Bradley University. What he says is the biggest challenge the school is facing moving forward. Welcome back. Joining me now, Gary Roberts, president of Bradley University. Thank you very much for stopping by.
My pleasure.
And welcome back to Central Illinois. One of the first things I wanted to discuss is the budget impasse and Bradley University. It's something that affects everybody in the state, and Bradley a little bit differently than some of the bigger schools, but particularly with MAP grants.
Well, it's a huge issue for us. The MAP grants is really the only issue that affects us. But it's $4.5 million a year. We have about 1,000 students who are eligible for an average of $4,500 apiece. And so that's $4.5 million we should have gotten this year that we have not. And if we never get it, that will be a big problem for us. But I think everybody's hoping that the folks in Springfield can figure this out and we'll get this money retroactively for this past year, and that our students will get it going forward for next year. If we don't have it by this fall, we've got some real tough questions as to how are we going to deal with students who would have been eligible for it. Are we going to, we can't, I don't think, just forgive that amount of money because that's too big a hit to our budget. We can't operate with that big of a deficit. If we don't figure out some way to help the students pay for it, then we might lose some students. We don't know. There are several choices and they're all bad. So we're hoping that Springfield figures this out.
Yeah, it's something we've been saying for months now. We hope that they figure it out. But it comes at a time when the cost of higher education is going up.
It is, and it's not because administrators are, squandering the money. Technology costs are skyrocketing. We have to replace all of our computers every 3 or 4 years. We have to expand our networks. We have to expand our broadband access. Security concerns, both internet security and physical security issues, are driving a lot of costs. Health insurance costs keep going up and up and up. And just marketing. I mean, we're in an increasingly competitive environment for a declining pool of college-age students. So all of these things are driving costs up. And when politicians and others say, well, you got to cut your costs, I just say, well, you show me where we can cut to the extent that you're saying we need to, and I'll be happy to consider it. But the costs are just largely unavoidable, unless we just completely restructure the American university, which I don't think we're prepared to do yet.
Well, you mentioned campus safety. When we come back in just a moment, I want to get into that discussion with you. You are watching Central Illinois on the Record.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome back. We're sitting down with Gary Roberts, the president of Bradley University. Thanks for sticking around for another segment. We talked about excuse me, school funding, MAP grants, budget impasse, and in that discussion you mentioned the cost of campus safety. Obviously, having a safe place for students to go to school is paramount.
Absolutely. You know, we're there to educate and to help students transition from being kids to being adults, but we have to keep them safe, and we have to keep our faculty and our staff safe. So that has to be a high priority. And the equipment the police need, the number of officers we need to have, the types of officers we need to have. And we also are responsible for patrolling the neighborhoods around Bradley. So that also adds to our responsibilities and our costs.
I think there are two big things that at least stick out of my mind when it comes to campus safety. Drinking on campus, and an issue that's tied to that in many ways, sex assaults on campus. And I know that right now at Bradley, the police are part of a sexual assault awareness campaign.
They are. I mean, one of the big things there is just education. We need to make students aware of risky behaviors. We need to make them aware of the legal consequences of crossing a line. It's for too many generations just been sort of the norm that this sort of misbehavior is something to be proud of, and we have to change that mindset. And so it's a big part of our educational process to change that culture.
And it really goes into, from some stories that I've done on campus, into the Greek life and administration at all levels, whether it deals directly with Greek life or just with students in general. So it's a very comprehensive approach, and it really gets students involved in educating other students about campus safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, fraternities somehow get a lot of the attention here, and rightfully so, frankly, but it's not just limited to fraternities. It's long been part of our culture that kids this age do things that they shouldn't do, and that's part of growing up, but they need to learn to control those kinds of bad behaviors in a lot of ways.
So we've talked about budgets, and we've talked about MAP grants, and we've talked about campus safety. What's the biggest challenge that Bradley faces as it moves forward and looks to attract students, retain students, and
well, given the limited time we have on television to discuss, I mean, I could talk for hours about that, and there's a lot of things I wish the public could know about this. But generally, it's making our academic programs relevant and affordable.
All right.
And I mean, I can summarize it in those two words. We've got to keep evolving so that what we're teaching and the programs we're offering are relevant to our modern economy and our modern society, and at the same time, keeping the cost to the students to where they can afford to come to college.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry we don't have more time, but I think I'll have to have you back on the program. President Gary Roberts, Bradley University. Still ahead, Senator Kirk sits down with the president's Supreme Court nominee, what he's saying about the meeting. But up next, CIOTR talks medical marijuana. We take a look at the results of a new study and what's next for the state's pilot program.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
Medical marijuana advocates in Illinois are continuing to push state government for greater access for patients. Last week, CIOTR sat down with Tim McGraw, the CEO of Revolution Enterprises, to discuss changes to the state's pilot program and a recent study. Last time we talked, there was a lot going on. We were talking about the Approve the 8, and there was a study that Revolution Enterprise was doing with its medical cannabis patients.
Correct.
I want to talk about the company. What's going on? What's new with the business?
We're moving. A lot going on right now. Both of our facilities, we have two $20+ million, 75,000 square foot facilities, both online now. Our labs at Delvin recently came online, so we'll be producing edibles and extracts and a lot more delivery methods for patients over the next 30 days or so. So we're excited about that. Patient population is growing steadily, month over month.
Revolution Enterprises did a survey of its with its dispensaries and the patients about which strands are strains rather are working for patients to cover specific ailments.
No, we did. It's very revealing. It reveals a lot of what we already knew, quite frankly, but it was the first of its kind study in Illinois. Over 104 patients participated. We had 4 dispensaries that partnered with us, and this was a real scientific study. The data was gathered in the right way, so the numbers are legit, and it showed that 90%, or greater than 90% of respondents with any strain of cannabis found pain relief. And industry people know that, or have known that a long time, but it proves out what we've known a long time, that cannabis works very, very well for pain conditions.
So what's the next step when it comes to figuring out what works for which patient?
Well, data like this is very important. We're going to continue to do these studies. The next study will be longer and have even more participants. But that's the idea, is to learn more about each individual strain and how that specific cannabinoid profile helps with certain conditions, whether it's diabetes or PTSD or anything in between those. Understanding the plant from a chemistry level is very, very important. That's what we're trying to do with this study.
Approve the 8 was a big push in Illinois. The last time we talked, right around that time, the governor rejected the 8 ailments that would have otherwise been approved for people to qualify as medical marijuana patients. Where do we stand with that push now?
Well, that was disappointing. We're still very hopeful that the administration is hearing the people. I mean, the science has spoken, the people have spoken, the polls have spoken. We had that Harper poll that we discussed last time I was on, where 80% of Illinois residents supported the program. Well, another poll was done by the Paul Simon Institute since then that showed it at 82%. So it's just growing, and this is a bipartisan issue. In our discussions with members of the General Assembly, it's Democrats and Republicans now are getting this. A huge number of Republicans have come over to the right side and see what this program is doing for the state. A lot of people are being helped, over 5,000 patients now. A lot more could be helped, and we could do a lot to stem the tide of this opiate addiction that we have. Over the last 11 years, year over year, we've seen an increase in opiate overdoses. 218 prescription overdose deaths in Illinois last year. 81% of those were from opiates. So over 20 people died last year from. This is something we could put a dent in very, very easily. So you look at states like Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California, Michigan, all of these states that allow the use of cannabis for the treatment of pain see a 25% or more reduction in opiate overdoses. So the writing's on the wall. The science is real. The numbers are unignorable at this point. We need to do something about it. So we're hopeful we will.
If you want to see the full interview with Tim McGraw, you can check it out on our website, ciproud.com. Still to come, a divided court makes a decision, what its ruling means for unions. Plus, the president's Supreme Court nominee sits down with a Republican senator, what Mark Kirk is saying about the meeting. President Obama's Supreme Court nominee, Judge Merrick Garland, finally gets a meeting on Capitol Hill with a Republican senator.
We need for rational, adult, open-minded consideration of the constitutional process, which Judge Garland is part of.
Mark Kirk is the first member of the GOP to go against his party by agreeing to speak with Garland about the Supreme Court nomination. Judge Garland is scheduled to meet with at least 2 other Republicans, but still faces a big hurdle on Capitol Hill. Judge Garland is a Chicago native and chief judge on the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. A divided Supreme Court hands down a decision last week that has implications right here in Illinois. The court upheld a ruling allowing unions the right to collect so-called fair share dues from non-union members they represent. Governor Rauner, a staunch opponent of the fair share rule, blamed the loss of Justice Antonin Scalia for the decision. Unions cheered the outcome.
This is about making sure that everybody pays their fair share for the services that they receive.
If Justice Scalia were alive, he made it pretty clear he supported the freedom of government employees to choose.
The governor promised to fight with another case moving through the courts in Illinois. Because the decision was a 4-4 tie, it doesn't create a precedent. Instead, it agrees with the lower court ruling. The Supreme Court says no to an appeal by former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. The impeached former governor was removed from office for corruption, including the solicitation of bribes for political appointments, including for the Senate seat vacated when Barack Obama was elected president in 2008. The 59-year-old is serving a 14-year sentence. The legal fight is over after the FBI hacks into the iPhone used by San Bernardino shooter Syed Farook. The Department of Justice asked a judge in California to vacate the order compelling Apple to assist the FBI in unlocking the iPhone. It was used by Farook, who, with his wife, killed 14 at a holiday luncheon. The FBI was helped by a third party, and Apple is now asking the government to reveal how it accessed the phone. Finally, a congressman from Illinois is pushing legislation to keep the White House accountable as the country continues to battle ISIS. Within a week of the terror attacks in Brussels, Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger introduced a bill that would require the president's administration to detail a strategy to destroy ISIS. The report from the White House would go to Congress every 2 years. Kinzinger is teaming up with Montana Representative Ryan Zinke, both of whom are Iraq War veterans. Kinzinger says this requirement will hold our commander-in-chief accountable for developing an effective strategy for destroying ISIS once and for all. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Central Illinois on the Record. Of course, you can stay in touch with us using social media. Connect with WMBD and me on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag CIOTR, and we'll see you next week.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of WMBD, WIZZ, or Nexstar Broadcasting Group.